In our editorial of today, taking further look into external self-determination through referendum, the case of Ambazonia by Marcus F Abendong, we continue with the Eritrean independence referendum. Eritrea, unlike the Southern Cameroons, which was a trust territory, was a British protectorate after Germany and its allies lost the Second World War. The protectorate lasted until 1952 when the United Nations, ignoring the legitimate desire of Eritreans, voted to grant it independence by attaching it to expansionist Ethiopia in a loose federation. In 1961, Emperor Haile Selassie ended the federation and annexed Eritrea, and war broke out. Eritrea's EPLF won the Liberation War in 1991 and called on the United Nations to conduct a referendum for Eritreans to tell the world what they wanted. The EPLF had won the war and could have gone ahead to proclaim its independence, but the territory decided to follow a more legitimate route that would garner international support and paid its way into the Committee of Nations. That worked out well. It is true that the Southern Cameroons do not have the kind of international backing that Eritrea had, but Ambazonia has a huge diaspora that can rise to the occasion if it really wants to. This independence war is winnable because it is truly God ordained. God does not fail. From the writer's opinion, the Eritrea War of Independence lasted decades because of the reluctance of the international community to correct its own errors that cost thousands of lives and untold sufferings for the unsuspecting people. Alas, someone felt their pain and the United Nations resolution was passed calling for a deciding referendum. Why did the United Nations make recourse to a referendum instead of respecting its own charter trusteeship agreement to solve the problem? Rather, the UN preferred the costly referendum which it sponsored. The answer lies in the body's respect for sovereign nations, which enjoy first consideration. Moreover, decades had passed and things might not necessarily be what they appear to be. Who knows the system thinks? The agitation for independence restoration might be coming from only a handful of gun-carrying disgruntled individuals. These are the terms used by Yaoundé to describe Southern Cameroon's independence activists. This may seem simplistic, but it is the way things are in the Committee of Nations. Sovereign nations have priority and are given the benefit of doubt until proven otherwise, most often at a great cost. A close examination of the Eritrean independence referendum gives us a little idea of how the United Nations system works. Eritrea is a former Italian colony ceded to the United Kingdom at the end of the Second World War. It was a British protectorate until the United Nations voted in 1951 to grant it independence by affixing it to Ethiopia. By the time the Southern Cameroons was being pushed to accede to independence by joining La République du Cameroun on 1st October 1961, the Eritrean-Ethiopian experiment had already collapsed and war broke out on 1st September 1961. For Ambazonians seeking shortcut, Eritrea's independence war lasted 3 decades, ending in 1992, and a referendum conducted in 1993. The Eritrean referendum was sponsored by the United Nations but only supervised by the organization. The UN Observer Mission was set up pursuant to the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 47/114 of December 16, 1992. The United Nations Observer Mission had a mandate to verify the impartiality of the vote, report claims of irregularities, verify the counting, computation, and witness the proclamation of the results. The writer stresses the mandate of the UN Observer Mission at the Eritrean independence referendum. The vote was conducted and result proclaimed unchallenged. Eritrean voted to separate from Ethiopia by 99.83%. It was overwhelming. The East Timorese vote was not this overwhelmingly in support of separation in spite of the fact conducted by the United Nations, though the outcome was separation. Now, East Timorese independence referendum. For the brief history, East Timor is a former Portuguese colony. Indonesia invaded and annexed East Timor in 1975, soon after the territory declared its independence from Portugal, leading to war. The Indonesian president Habibie requested that the United Nations conduct a referendum to decide the matter. That means more than 3 decades of a senseless war, carnage, thousands of deaths, and untold suffering. Unlike the Eritrean independence referendum vote that was conducted by locals with Ethiopian oversight, the East Timorese process was handled entirely by the United Nations system, from voter identification through registration to voting, counting, and results declaration. For this purpose, the United Nations mission to East Timor, UNAMET, hired the services of 240 international staff, 270 civilian police, 50 military liaison officers, 425 UN volunteers, and 668 local East Timorese staff for translation and driving. The voter turnout was massive, 98.93%, and the result compared to the Eritrean referendum vote was less overwhelmingly in favor of separation from Indonesia, 78.5%. The aftermath, unlike the peaceful aftermath of the Eritrean independence referendum vote, the East Timorese referendum was followed by an outbreak of violence on the territory. Pro-Indonesian militias, those we call Atanga NG boys in Ambazonia, and the Indonesian army and security forces were responsible for the violent reaction. East Timor's infrastructure was massively destroyed, thousands killed including women and children. The United Nations had not anticipated such a reaction and so was not ready. By the time the UN peacekeeping mission was deployed, the damage had been done. No comparison. From the above understudied referendums, it can be said that no two events are ever the same, even when they go by the same appellation. Whereas Cubicoi, the Scottish referendums, have been organized by the locals and only observed by the centre, the Eritrean and East Timorese referendums were organized by the United Nations, albeit with different levels of involvement. Ottawa and London could trust Quebec and Scotland to organize their own referendums because transparency in electoral matters is part of the culture in this part. The same could not be said for the Indonesians, but to a lesser degree for the Ethiopians. This explains why the Eritrean referendum vote, though sponsored by the UN, was only observed by the international body, whereas the East Timorese referendum processes were entirely handled by the United Nations from voter identification to the declaration of results. Common to all these referendums was the participation of their diaspora citizens. As you would observe, nowhere that the citizens of these territories seeking separation living in the territories of the mother countries participated in the referendums. In the case of Scotland in particular, Scottish citizens living in England were not allowed to vote during referendums. The reason is obvious. Scots living in, say, London, with investments there will have vested personal interest in opposing separation from what seems to be home to them. They may not directly feel the difficulties and constraints of Scots back home. It is said that London is more Scottish than Scotland. This certainly is the same reason for which Eritreans and East Timorese living in Ethiopia and in Indonesia may not have been allowed to participate in the independence referendum of their countries. From the writer's point of view, Her Majesty's government so desperately wanted to deprive the Southern Cameroons of independence that it laid and hatched multiple schemes to block the territory from acceding to autonomy and self-government. Having successfully blocked the independence plan for all colonies and trust territories, the United Kingdom imposed her own contraption, independence, by joining. Even here, the United Kingdom so badly wanted the Southern Cameroons to remain as a part of Nigeria. It seemed that she abandoned all her post-plebiscite responsibilities towards the former. What befell the Southern Cameroons then in 1961 was evil, well orchestrated and executed by Her Majesty's government. Number 10 Downing Street was so bent on punishing the Southern Cameroons, it disregarded warnings and counsels from Parliament and its own representation in the territory. The UK's preference for a plebiscite instead of a referendum was probably part of the plan. Plebiscites are only consultative and do not have the power of law, even at the United Nations. Is that why the UK was able to dodge her responsibilities without anyone raising a finger? The evil that visited the Southern Cameroons in 1961 is the more outrageous because it was executed exactly 1 month after a similar experience between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Between the time Eritrea and Ethiopia had collapsed following the annexation of the weaker partner by the stronger on September 1st, 1961. Now, how could the international community have gone ahead with the unification plan between the Southern Cameroons and La République du Cameroon after the East African experience had just failed? Tomorrow, we'll continue this interesting article, taking further observation from the writer's perspective on the questions of Ambazonia independence referendum. But for now, we've come to the end of our editorial of tonight. If you want more of such interesting articles, kindly visit our website at www.abcambatv.com for more. Subscribe, become a club member, and a part of this winning strategy. Find out payment details on your screen. I'm Sir Smart reporting for Undaunted, ABC Amba TV.